Okay, welcome everyone. Let's get started. My name's Josh Colchester, and today we're learning about the two loops model. I'm part of the London Hub. I'm joined by my colleague Hannah, also part of the London Hub, who's going to help with the facilitation. Do you want to say hello, Hannah?
Hi everyone. See you.
Great. And as noted, it's a collaboration with the Mumbai Hub. So we have Vijaya all the way from Mumbai. Do you want to say a little hello, Vijaya?
Hi everyone. Hi.
So Hannah and Vijaya are going to do most of the facilitation today. We're going to be walking through this canvas here. I'll explain all of that before we get started. So generally, how it's going to work, we're going to first do some dot voting here. I'll have you all join in a minute on the Miro board. We'll do a little voting about the kind of challenge, the kind of transition we want to map out today and try and model with the two loops canvas. We'll then jump into the workshop over here. This canvas, the two loops canvas, is going to help us think about a transition or a transformational process in a complex adaptive system. I'll explain how it works if you're not familiar with it, but Hannah and Vijaya are going to walk you through these different stages or different aspects to this transition process. And that'll be the bulk of the work of the time today. Maybe to get started, let's just test our Miro skills. So Hannah, if you could please share the link with members. We're going to join in here when you're ready, and just grab a little dot here and place yourself on the map. So I'm joining from London this morning or this afternoon, and please do that so as to get familiar and that we can see where you're all coming from. We'll take a couple of minutes to do that whilst we're still collecting people. Great. So is everybody able to find the Miro board? Is everybody able to find where I am? Do we know how to use a Miro board? It's mainly just navigation, zooming in and out, moving around. And the only other thing we'll be doing today is really using stickies. So we just click on the sticky there, we place it down, and then we type in here. Quite simple, really. If you have any problems, you could put them in the chat there. I'm sure Hannah could help you or flag them up. So hopefully you found it here. This is what our group looks like today. Some people from Australia and India and quite a few here in Europe, in Scandinavia and the UK. Great. So hopefully that was a little exercise to get you warmed up. Let's talk about this, the two loops model, so that we're all familiar with what we're talking about here. So firstly, this content we're using today is taken from our website. There's a guide here around what the two loops model is. It'll explain the whole thing for you if you're not familiar with it, all the ideas and the method and so forth. You just click on that link there and it'll take you to it. What we're using here, what you see in front of us, what we'll be working with is a canvas based upon that. And you can find that canvas also on the website, just clicking here. So the two loops model, this is a model, it's quite simple in its essence. Two loops, right? Really just two lines like that. It was developed by the Berkana Institute a number of years ago, and it's to help us think about a transition or a transformational process in a complex organization of any kind, right? Any kind of complex adaptive system. This could be in a business, it could be in a political regime moving from a dictatorship to a democracy. It could be in an agricultural system. It could be in virtually any industry, right? It has similar patterns of transformation. And it's based upon this idea of living systems. We're recognizing that these complex adaptive systems are living systems, and we know that ecosystems, living systems, they transform and change through processes of growth and decay and regeneration and so forth. So the two loops are really capturing that growth and decline of one system, and then the incubation, emergence, and development of the next generation of that system. So ecosystems are classic examples of this, right? We have these trees, they grow, they mature, and ultimately they'll decompose, and they'll spread seeds, right? And those seeds will then be in the soil, developed in the soil, but also this tree at a certain stage, it will start falling to pieces and it'll be decomposed by the bacteria, and those resources will be released for those new seeds to use them again to build new shoots, to build up trees, and to build up the next generation of that system. So it's a very good analogy of what we're talking about, and we know we see that in all of these kind of large scale transformation processes, whether in society, economy, technology even, so on and so forth. That's the essence of what we're talking about. It's what the model is really trying to capture. And it's asking, how do we, we're talking about systems innovation, we're talking about systems change here. We don't just want to understand that. We also want to think about how we're going to navigate that, how we're going to enable that successfully, because it can go in many different directions. We know that. We can create a lot of problems here. A lot of problems can arise in this change process. For example, from one generation to the next, or from one stage in the development of an organization to the next. There can be a lot of problems, or we can, understand this process and enable it successfully to move from the old to the new. So that's really what we're talking about here, to understand that and to think about how do we enable that successfully. And that's really what's captured down here. I'll briefly walk you through that in a minute. Let's just take another look at some more key aspects here. One of the key aspects is that this transition process is not linear, right? It's not like a machine that just keeps on, your computer, you just keep on upgrading it and it gets a better operating system and so forth. We know that's not the way it works out there in the world in ecosystems. Actually, this regime dies, right? It falls to bits and a new one is born. So there's actually a discontinuous process there. There's a transformation. We know it's an interesting aspect, right? We know these things are kind of it's one process, but it's also discontinuous. This generational change is, it involves the old and the new, but there's this kind of discontinuous aspect there. And that's a key aspect in terms of how do we manage to navigate from that old paradigm, that old regime, to the new one, and successfully move those resources into the new model, into the new pattern. So yeah, there's a number of, once we understand what's going on, we'll be looking at that. Then of course you want to know, how can we help this? How can we enable this to be successful? And there are a number of different dimensions to that. We want to think about what are these new innovations. I'll take a look at it let's take a look at it down here quickly, what we're talking about. Hannah and Vijaya will walk you through this in more detail, but very briefly, this top cycle is the incumbent system. So we want to understand, what does that look like? We want to understand, what are those new innovations here? We want to understand, what's the system that's emerging? And also, how can we help the old system to decompose successfully, right? How can we help it to see its place in the new system and make that transition successfully? In terms of developing these new innovations, we want to think about how to connect them and nurture them. That's over here, and ultimately illuminate them, right? So this new paradigm, this new way of doing things in the system, we want to illuminate it back to the old system and try and enable the old to move into the new through this bridging, right? These people or these connections that bridge from the old to the new and enable that transition. So that's the very high level overview to what we're talking about. As mentioned, it plays out in many different types of systems. Almost any kind of transition process can be understood in this way. Could be in your own life, right? Moving from being an adolescent to being an adult. It could be within a business, could be in many different areas. But for us to work on this, we need to think about what system we're going to talk about. What kind of transition are we talking about today? So today's just an exercise. So we're going to take a couple of examples that we could use. I want you to join me here now. We'll do some voting about what we're going to be talking about today. So the first one around finance. Do we want to think about the transition from traditional nation-state centralized banking system to the internet-based decentralized global digital currencies? We're going to talk about media. So these are all examples of transitions in complex systems. This one here in the media, we know that big changes have been happening there, big disruptions. We've made a substantial transition from that industrial age centralized broadcast media to the decentralized network communications, where we're all producers and consumers and we can exchange peer-to-peer. It's a very different model. There's obviously a transition going on there. Is that what we want to talk about? Do you want to talk about transport from car-centric, really, is what it's been about. It's been petroleum-based. It's automotive ownership to this new model of on-demand micro-mobility, electric vehicles, and so on. Do you want to talk about that? This one here, education. We know big changes are happening and will need to happen in the coming decade, from the industrialized, centralized paradigm of education to learning happening anywhere, anytime, on demand. It's continuous learning. Food, a transition from the industrial model, mass agribusiness to organic regenerative food production, or finally in the circular economy and how we deal with materials from that well-known linear economy, take, make, waste, to this new circular, hopefully regenerative economy. So there we go. Everybody please jump in there. We'll take maybe a minute for you to figure this one out. Hopefully, Hannah, you're keeping track of the questions, and if there's anything there that needs addressing, we can take a look at it.
Okay, so far.
I will say today's event is being live streamed and therefore recorded. It will be a session of approximately 90 minutes. Yes. Okay, so if you all feel like you voted at this stage, and it looks like, well, Johanni,
Education.
have you voted? Looks like education, right? So let's talk about the transition in education that's underway. As mentioned, some really big changes. We know that things are changing out there in the world, right? Our economy is requiring new skills, but just as importantly, kind of cultural changes and values and so forth are asking for a very different model to the industrial age one that we all know intimately, right? Most of us spent 10, 12 years of our lives in that system. We know how it works, but we also know something else is possible, and we're starting to see that something else is possible. And the question is, well, what is that? Firstly, we want to think about what's, the first loop. What is that existing system? Second loop, what is this emerging new system? And yeah, I'm going to leave Hannah and Vijaya to walk you through the individual boxes and for you to think about that and work through this. Yeah, I'd like you to, as you go through it, this is about systems change. So we're talking about structural changes. That is the way the whole system is organized, right? And we're also talking about paradigm changes. That's changes in our ways of thinking about what this system is and what it should be doing and its function ultimately. So try to avoid, individual specific things and try to think about structural changes, maybe going from the fact that education was a thing that just happened in a school 9 to 5 to now it can happen anywhere, anytime, right? That's a structural change, and the availability of information, that's changed hugely. It used to be, centralized in libraries and universities, and now it's anywhere, anytime. Those are examples of structural changes. We could also think about changes in our mentality and our paradigm, right? Starting to see education not just as a way to get a career, to get a certificate or whatever, but it's actually something you need to actually succeed in life, and something that you're named continuously as you go along. Actually, we had an event yesterday. I'll finish now, but I'll just say we had an event, was it yesterday or the day before, with the Cabreras, who are thinking about systems thinking in education, and they were talking about the shift being from, one of the important shifts being from, you know, us just learning information and knowledge to us having to have a metacognition, right? A real kind of capacity to think through things, critical thinking, systems thinking, all this stuff. So that's a paradigm shift from just absorbing information to actually having those thinking skills to really understand it and think through it for ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to leave you guys to figure all this out, actually, and Hannah's going to get started here. Up at the top, I'll just say, as you would have observed, there's numbers here, so we'll be going through those numbers. There are two aspects to this. One is thinking about what exists, you know, what is the system, what's the emergency, and then the second one is about how do we develop that, how do we enable that transition. Okay, Hannah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Joss. Okay, so can everybody join us at the top of the board at point 1? We're going to map the incumbent system. Great, seems like a few people joining us there. So yeah, we probably know already quite well, like Joss has picked up, you know, we're talking about a system that we've all probably been part of at some point. You know, we might even call it the establishment. It's the dominant way of doing things. What we would do here at this point on the canvas is start to map and describe what this existing system looks like. So Joss, if we can have a 3-minute timer, please. What we're thinking here is to start to think about who some of the actors are in this system, those people that might have the invested interest in it continuing the way it is. We could also look at what structures, goals, and values that are in place that perhaps keep it going. I think when we talk about, you know, education as well, we could think of some of the specific institutions like universities and the academics, the people that are already deeply entrenched in this system. So I'll stop talking and give you a couple of minutes to map those.
Yeah, let's just make sure. Some people seem to be having problems with, if you just, for a sticky, you just click on the sticky on the side and you put it down there and then you type away. Yeah, you can choose your color, you can choose where you put it, not too big, please. Try to keep it a reasonable scale. If you have any problems, yeah, you can ask any of us. But let's work away. We take, yeah, we've got 3 minutes from here. Just a little note, when you're finished typing, please deselect the stickies. You just go, you type something and then deselect so that we can see what it looks like. Yeah, so I think you got the idea there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Time's up. So how did we find that exercise? Does anyone want to share? I'm noticing a lot here about the teachers, the role of the teacher in this current system is to be kind of like all-knowing. There's a few comments here about teachers' salaries, something about the teacher being on a low income. Does anyone want to share about that? What we're seeing in the system as it is? Just maybe you want to jump in here.
I'm happy to make a comment from Australia with regards to some of the issues around current wage things. We're currently in an environment within government in New South Wales, so no criticism or anything, it just is what it is. It's within legislation around the rates of increase each year that are capped. And that's one of the things that's leading to potentially is a salary gap between other professions and teachers, which is then leading to potentially some experience of reduced levels of staff in certain locations. So.
Sounds like what you're saying is, well, the problem there is almost creating the conditions for something new to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at the board, I mean, there's quite a bit here about power as well. The power is held by quite a few, only by a few. So they were talking about, the teachers being in a poor position, but there are still quite a few actors in there that I guess are holding on to the system as it is, so they're not seeing the need to change. I don't see many of those listed, but do we have any ideas of who those actors might be?
Yeah, are they more like in the administration, or are they the teachers? Or?
Hi folks, Elaine here from Ireland. So the education system isn't my background, but I know quite a lot of people who work in it. So it is a very hierarchical structure. So the power is held by few. So when it comes to enabling change in a system, you need everybody to have a responsibility for that change. But if they're not empowered or enabled to do that, they're going to step away from it. And then you have potential for resistance as well. So the actors for that are, I suppose, if you take any education body, you're going to have the people who are delivering the education, the administrators, the leadership team within the education setting. And if it's a very traditional hierarchical structure, I think change is less likely to occur in that system, and possibly not meet the emerging needs of how people wish to engage in education in the future.
I can only, sorry, this is Tara here. I can only echo what Elaine said. It is highly hierarchical. I work with schools, mostly private schools here, and it is the head teacher and the SLT who have to say the notion of empowerment is there, but it's more in word, not in action.
I guess you could say in some sense, the people that have got to those positions have worked very hard for that. Perhaps later in life, you're sort of less likely to want to see the need for change.
Some of it comes down to, like, whether it's education or any other system, it comes down to people's relationship with power and what that means to them. So whether what does it mean to share it? What does it mean to hold on to it? So I think unless you look at that and address that power relationship, you're going to struggle to bring about the other pieces that you need.
So I guess we're at time on this one. Vijaya, do you want to walk through the next section?
Okay. Yeah, some great contribution there. We didn't get to it all, but thank you very much for sharing. Okay, so Vijaya.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So we're going to be looking at the pockets of the future. So what are some of the new alternatives that are emerging in the current system? So the current system either could be at its peak, or it is at a stage of starting to decline. So at that point, there could be several alternatives that could emerge from different parts of the system. So what do these new alternatives look like? So these could look very different from the existing system because they are trying to create a new paradigm. And these new alternatives can emerge from any part of the system. So it could also be from the periphery of the existing system. And typically you will find that these innovators belong to an younger generation because they are not conditioned by the old logic of the existing system. Or sometimes these innovators are able to foresee the decline of the current system. So please grab your stickies and post here about how does these new alternatives look like. So that could potentially be challenges to the existing paradigm.
Yeah, and we do want to, we're talking about systems change, so we do want to think about things that actually have the capacity. These are the things that are actually going to, create the new system. So if they aren't, representative of something different in terms of structure, in terms of values, in terms of ideas, we're not really going to get systems change. So try to consider things that have that potential in them to really be the seed. These are like the seeds of the new. So have the values, have the ideas, have the structure and so forth to actually change the system.
Okay, the time is up. So let's look at some of the new alternatives that are emerging. Community service learning. Clearly defined role of parents in education. Yes, I think parents can have a much larger role to play in the emerging system. New evaluation systems. Learning exchange models. Anyone wants to talk about that?
Hi, yeah, it's Arsene from Cape Town. So I put that. I get to understand that the way of learning is shifting away from the traditional way to move more on providing opportunity for people to learn through doing or through exchanging experiences And to me, I think that's way of learning is actually quite adaptive in the context, because in most cases, people are learning from various experiences that they are getting, and it's actually becoming very useful in the context of the work that they are doing. Because at the end of the day, the whole idea is you learn to apply somewhere and make meaningful contribution or meaningful impact. Yeah. So that's what I meant when I wrote that.
Okay. Cool. STEM mindset. Anyone wants to talk about that? Is that a new alternative which is emerging?
Yeah, hi Vijaya, this was Rama. I had put up that STEM mindset. I think some of the skills which we traditionally associate with being in STEM are emerging as one of the key needs, even in overall study, in all spheres of life. Rather, like it's not just for the people in science, but literally everybody is using those mindsets required. Problem solving, critical thinking, or looking at things from a more data-oriented way. So it is not just being about being in STEM. Even as an artist, you need sometimes these things to think out of the box, and imbibe some of these mindsets to like make a difference in whatever you're doing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lama. Empathy-based education, skill and interest-oriented trainings. Yes. And then role of digital and new learning platforms and accessible nature of engaging in education and a more collaborative style of delivering education. The role of AR and VR as tools. Yes, I think technology is having a very larger role to play here in this new paradigm. So we talked about the hierarchical structure in the last box. Has anyone said anything about decentralizing those power structures?
Well, maybe this here.
This one, yes, this one is talking
that's...
about a collaborative style. Is there anyone else who's talked about that?
I talked a little bit about community practice and like online courses and how that's kind of shifting the capacity for us to educate ourselves in a different way. It doesn't require hierarchies, but it's more organically built, you could say, because anyone can learn any skills nowadays. So it's more of the individual interest of someone to go and learn.
Yeah. So instead of fixed times and very limited number of experts and resources, that's kind of opening up. Okay, so I think we are at the end of this. And over to you, Hannah.
Thanks. Everyone join at point 3 at the bottom of the second loop. The next thing for us to do is to start to map and describe the emerging system. So when you move on from those niche innovations, the pockets of the future, you can start to see that a new system is emerging. So the question here is, what are the signs we can see of a new system in this context? So just like we did with the dominant, the incumbent, we asked like, who are the specific institutions, what groups of actors are showing up? Do we see any new structures, goals, and values that demonstrate that it is a new system? And we've got 4 minutes here. Just, you mind starting the timer?
I guess it's about emergence too. So it's like how maybe a number of new innovations across the system are starting to come together and not just be kind of single point interventions. Quite often what happens, you have the old system and then you have new innovations kind of popping up in different places, but really to get to a new paradigm, those are going to have to be kind of connected in a new way. And it's when they get connected, you start to see new patterns, new ways of kind of doing things. And I think that's part of what we're asking about. What would this new system look like? Yeah.
So I can see a lot here around collaboration and collective intelligence. Somebody's given the example of TED. Makes sense, you know, anyone can, well, lots of different perspectives can come and share there, and anybody can access that anywhere in the world. It's not tied to a particular, you know, place or time, which we see in the existing model. There's quite a few interesting ones here that I kind of want to draw a line through, or connect them together, sorry, of like how children are responding to this new way of learning. There's something here around them just wanting to get up to attend in the morning, to, you know, being free to choose the nature of what they learn and when they learn. Does anyone want to, there's a few post-its there, does anyone want to talk about that? Not just in the context of children as well, we've got platforms for personalized learning. And then also here's sort of the proliferation of various education structures and platforms. I mean, I don't know if it's global, but I think of, for example, Future Learn and Coursera, like people can create their own content on there. Again, it's accessible across boundaries, and generally it's free or super cheap. So it's very interesting. And something here at the bottom as well around COVID impacting this. So certainly, I mean, does anyone want to talk around that? You're just talking at it.
Yeah, I can talk to that. Sorry, yeah, go on ahead, Joss, if you want to jump in there.
No, I mean, it's just interesting, you know, the need for adaptation, right? And to be, I mean, COVID's just driving, it's just one thing, isn't it? It's a kind of a shock that's kind of driven, well, I guess shown how, you know, potentially rigid and inflexible the system is. Everyone's got to be in the same place, same time, and so forth. And something a lot more adaptive is probably needed going forwards. Yeah, Helen. Elaine, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I suppose, I guess, yeah, I would agree with what you're talking about, Joss, but I suppose I also see that the response that was required to COVID, and indeed within Ireland, we had a cyber attack then on top of that within our health service. So I guess I see that it's shown the potential for the agility and the adaptive responses. It allowed people who ordinarily may not have been able to demonstrate their full skills in the workplace to actually step forward and bring their full skills and their full ability to the workplace, be that education or another setting, creative, I suppose, solutions to things. And so that flatter, that reduced hierarchical structure started to present itself because everybody just needed to respond because it was an emergency. And there's a little bit about not losing that potential with people in organizations. And that's really essentially what's going to fuel that adaptive, agile response. So I actually think there's been a learning opportunity from COVID. Certainly it's demonstrated where there are areas of rigidity, but actually I think it's also shown the potential to flourish and to be a more agile, adaptive space. And I may be interested to hear other people's thoughts on that as well.
I do think COVID kind of really highlighted the problem with having such a dominant incumbent way of working, because then everything sort of falls out, doesn't it? It's one big problem rather than a few
kind of
small niche things. But
monolithic in a way, isn't it? I think what you're getting at is the people were very adaptive, weren't they? But not necessarily the structure of the system. Is that right? No.
Yeah, just despite the system, Joss.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So I think there's something in that.
Yeah. Okay. Paolo?
Yeah. I was having a conversation today. I'm part of a Malmö University here in Sweden, and there's something called the Malmö Social Innovation, and they were talking about the roles that universities have nowadays to also drive this aspect of social imagination, and how we need to be more bold to be able to encourage university students to work in a multidisciplinary way in order for them to be an active participant and get into the networks to actually create the systems and the cities that we are wishing to create. So I thought that was very, very interesting, of bridging different disciplines, of start thinking about, okay, what is the role that universities and these different institutions have in our society now, and what is the role that they need to have in the future? And the fact that they're having these conversations, I thought was very refreshing.
Interesting. I learned in London just a few days ago, there's a school for interdisciplinary learning. Like they're starting a university and degrees just based purely on like focusing on how that works. So super interesting. Thank you. I think we need to move on. So over to you, Vijaya, the next step.
Yeah. So we are looking at the top curve once again. And the way the curve looks, it's actually bending down, which means the existing system is on the decline. So when a system is on the decline, the resources needs to be released to the broader system, and the members of the system and even sometimes the organization needs hospicing, which means the members need tending towards their emotional and spiritual needs. And what are some of the ways in which we can develop alternative narratives, so which will help these members to accept the new reality and also let go of the past, because this system is in its decline. So what are some of the ways in which we can hospice the members of this incumbent system and also the entire organization?
Yeah, I always think of this as just like, looking after your parents when they get older, right? We don't just, throw them away, do we? We need to take care of them and help them, part the world in a successful way, or as best they can. And this is what's needed here also. And I think it's that, as you say, kind of a spiritual thing also. It's a kind of it's a cultural thing, let's say, because they're facing the end of their career and letting go and so forth. So that a lot of that is a psychological thing. So how do we help them with that?
Yeah, it's a closure, recognizing a closure. And I'm also reminded of some of the rituals that we do,
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Even in organizations, we do a lot of rituals to mark closures and to mark beginnings. Yeah, so let's look at some of the stickies here. I'm very curious about the one in yellow at the top. Ho'oponopono, what is that? Anyone who wants to talk about that?
Yeah. Hi. Ho'oponopono is it's a practice in Hawaii, which is it's a lot about grieving. So you unless reflect the things that we regret from the old system, you forgive for the maybe things which we created harm or weren't so good about the old system. We give love towards the things that it gave us and gratitude. So we really reflect around these things, and it's a way to really let go of the old in a compassionate way.
Yeah, I think it makes sense a lot. So grief collectively, you wrote the same?
Yes. So
Okay.
these three are kind of within the same realm, and from there, then being able to create a new meaning moving forward. So it's kind of like we first need to grieve, and then we need to understand the new purpose.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful to know. And I also wonder at the same time how many organizations, really give space for this, collective grief to be expressed. It was good to know. Facilitate. Sorry, Joss.
Well, I'm sure you find this in almost every culture that has ever existed, right? Funerals and so forth, wakes in Ireland in the Catholic religion and so forth. Like every culture would have developed ways to deal with this. So we can learn a lot from that, right? When it comes to systems change.
Yeah. So practice compassion and empathy. Discuss what we have learned from the old and what do we want to take? What do we need to leave? Yes. I feel that people don't fear new ways of working. They just like doing what they've done before. Okay. Okay, acknowledge what went well. Okay, find place in the new system for everyone who wants to participate from the old one. Yep. Reflective practice and letting go.
Do we have any examples of what these places or spaces? This would be our job, right, as systems innovators and systems changers, to use this to create something that's going to enable this to actually be turned into a reality, a space where those people can connect. Does anybody have examples of that?
Hey, Joss. I have a very recent example of my own organization where we came from, having a small cohort of managers in a workshop kind of a space. And so there were multiple themes going around and this letting go thing. So it was an exercise as a team to reflect on three things: stop, start, and continue. So that's the beginning of letting go as a collective for them to discuss, and even we then together came to a consensus of all the points to. So these are the 10 things we are letting go about this particular theme. It was a very normally we may be very hesitant, or not even hesitant, I would say possibly not able to come to a consensus on what to let go, but working in small groups and then coming to a collective to realize that it was like a great moment for us as a cohort to realize, okay, these are the 10 things we collectively want to let go of in this organization and not do it anymore. So yeah. I think networks, it would really work. I mean, this was a very small example of a network in that sense. But when we talk about networks, I guess.
So I think another one is the idea of these people having roles in the new system. And one example I find is often if you listen to an older generation, they often say that they want to give, as people get older, gets near to the end of their career, they want to give something back. You hear that from people. They also want to share what their knowledge and experience with a younger generation. And there's a really good role there, right? That's a huge synergy, isn't it? These people who have this experience, they don't maybe have the energy and motivation so much anymore. And the young people who don't have the experience and so forth. So there's a role there for like mentorship, isn't there? So that's one way that these people from the older system could really create that connection with the new system. You create spaces for that and really enable a successful transfer of the knowledge from the old system, because knowledge is part of this that needs to happen. And then they have a role in it. They start to interact, they start to see themselves as part of that new system and not adverse to it. Okay, we stay calm.
Okay, over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Next, we're at point number 5. So here is the question of how do we connect the new innovations? So sitting between those niche pockets of the future and the emerging system, there's a role for the niches to come together. They might form what's called like a community of practice. It's basically innovators, organizations connecting them so they become bigger than the sum of their parts, if you like. So at this point, we want to ask ourselves, who are the communities that are coming together around the innovations and what needs to happen to connect them further? We might want to think of things like consortiums, groups that share resources. I'll leave it over to you. Can we have a timer, please, Just?
Yeah, so I'll just note also we are in the stage where we're thinking about how to enable this transition, right? So the hospicing is part of that, but now we're thinking about, right, how can we really grow this new system? A new system is going to have to come into being before we can really move into this new world. There's got to be something there. And to develop that to emerge, we know emergence is about connecting things. So our job as systems innovators, systems changers here is about how do we get these, how do we find these new pockets of the future, and then how do we connect them to create this emerging system? So that's we're doing work here. We're doing systems change work when we think about this. It's not just identifying them anymore. It's now thinking about how do we actually connect them and build them. Okay.
see on here, Twitter. I mean, that's just a nice, simple one, really, like utilizing a lot of the different platforms that we've picked up on in the kind of emerging innovations there, you know, just to connect some of these people, like making the best use of the structures that are already out there. There's a couple of comments here about creating a common vision. This one particularly around backcasting, and then using the vision to connect the work and ensure value for investment of time, money, people, and learning. Does anyone want to talk more about that? I mean, I can say.
I wrote that, but I talked too much already, so please someone else talk.
I feel the same, Paolo. Go for it though, if you want to talk to it.
I see, Elaine, that you unmuted your mic. Do you want to say something?
Well, yeah, Paolo, you and I are obviously the talkers today. So I'm conscious of that. I suppose it's like we're all here, we're all interested in systems thinking, in enabling and empowering innovation. And I guess, you know, whether that's, if we're talking about from an education point of view, whether that's regionally or globally, the same issues appear for organizations. So the idea, I suppose, where I'm coming from is to try and bring those people together in a collective so that, you know, from an efficiency point of view at a very basic level, what can we learn from each other? What can be applied in one part of Ireland that could be applied in another part of Ireland? What can be applied in England that could be applied in France? You know, regardless of where we're coming from, I think the core fundamental issues are always the same. So having spaces like this is really useful because we can start to learn from each other, try and trim down some of the excess in terms of approaches to things so that we're very streamlined. And I think that one of the ways to do that is actually a shared purpose, whether that's on a process piece or, more importantly to me, from the people component of it. So that shared purpose is what essentially can bring people together, that tribe that I'm talking about, find like-minded people to have the conversation with and be advocates for this way of working. So that's where I was coming from with that.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's quite fundamental to transition theory as well. Is like, you know, it's something new and emergent. So we need to have this reflexive practice that somebody's mentioned here of like reflecting on what we're doing, but, you know, kind of linking that back to the vision always. So we know what journey we're on together. Really useful.
Wouldn't it be amazing if students got to create their own vision too? You know, your class created your own vision of what they're doing here and your school and so forth.
Yeah, design out from that. I guess that's the backcasting. So moving on, I feel like there's some inspiration from the conversation earlier of having like this experience in new knowledge mentorship as well. Does anyone have any thoughts on how that looks in a practical context, in the context of taking the kind of old system and into this new democratized way of learning?
I mean, I think the basics of it is just having conversations and really understanding the capacity of the old system, the capacity of the new system, the new tools that have been emerging, and how do we connect those. And I think leaving room for like this type of learning that is very exploratory in its nature, because although we may have a vision of a collective vision of the future of education, still it's a learning process. And I think as a system thinkers, we should also allow it to naturally develop in an organic way, but keeping the vision at bay, but also allowing to learn along the way and to involve people from different ages as well, to give kind of power to also, like you mentioned earlier, the students. What does the young generation have to say? I think that's very, very interesting for me to look into.
Saying is bringing and this talks to what's here as well around connecting with custodians of Indigenous knowledge together with those institutions of learning, of like bringing a right selection of stakeholders together in the network. Super interesting. Something here wasn't sure what it meant about identifying boundary spanners and distributive leadership models. It'd be great to hear about that one.
Yeah, hi, that was me. I mean, I've realized that, sometimes being a jack of all trades helps in developing, connecting new innovations together, somebody's multiple interests. So that's what the term for them is, like boundary spanners who belong to many different worlds. And if you identify such people in any system who have multiple interests and give them the opportunity of being leaders, they are one of those fundamental key links in connecting, like, for example, education and health. So a person who's very core within education, maybe just looking at that ecosystem in that sense, but somebody who has their feet kind of in both the places and understands that can, with the help of some good distributive leadership models, if we are not trying to hero worship the leader at one space and give them the opportunities, these innovations can really take, it will be great for building these innovations in a much better way with understanding of multiple fields than one.
So talking about connecting them back to different industries as well, not just within this new system, but other systems that we might see too.
Yes.
I'm super interested. I think we're out of time on this one. Sorry, go on, Joss.
Yeah. Well, it's an artificial construct talking about a system, because it's obviously a system of systems. Every large complex, the educational system in the United States is probably $1 trillion financial system actually that supports that, right? And it's a healthcare, it's an insurance system, it's a so on and so forth. So always be cognizant of that, exactly as you're saying, and connecting across it in different, not just in the system. Like we were kind of looking inside the box, weren't we? Thinking about what inside can we connect, but Rama's saying, yeah, across different systems. Okay, great. So here, Nourishing.
Over to you, Vijaya.
Yeah. Okay, so we have looked at pockets of innovations, and we have also talked about how do we connect them, because in the very beginning stages, these innovators would be isolated, and we have talked about how do we connect these innovators who are in different parts of these large systems. Let's look at now Nourishing. So these innovators have found their places, and they're able to share their ideas, and they are able to meet them, and we've been able to name who are these innovators. So for this emerging system to emerge in a coherent pattern, we need to nourish these innovators, not just connect them and name them. They also need nurturing in terms of resources. For example, funding. I mean, who will provide the funding? Who will be able to, provide the necessary skill sets or mentor advice, expert advice? So what are the different ways in which we can nourish these innovators?
Yeah, it could be shared tools, shared knowledge, people who are developing that and making it accessible. It could be also organization, like people, that could be one problem here, that these new innovations just aren't able to kind of organize themselves. And so providing some organizational support could be another thing. It's a lot of different dimensions to it.
Okay, the time is up. And so I see someone talked about connecting students in the previous section and forming a network for students to voice their choices, create dialogue opportunities. So anyone has talked about how would you go about nourishing them so that the students' voices may become something of a source of influence for the new paradigm?
I think helping them find the right fundings would be very important. One of the ways in which I describe this one is I'm part of something called the Global Shapers. And we essentially solve localized problems, and we have hubs very much like a Social Innovation Summit, right, across different countries, and we do collective research. Yet, if there are some projects that we want to apply funding for, it's very difficult for us to find that. So provide opportunities and get politicians and policymakers to acknowledge the benefits that working with us has, and giving us the opportunity to go out there and communicate this new way and share ideas. I think that would be kind of a foundational block. I think people my generation and the ones before me are very much into this new way of working. We just need to be in the positions when we can actually have some influence.
Okay. Creating a culture of innovation, one that is visibly supported by senior leadership. Innovation through action and not lip service. Building capacity across an organization so everyone has an opportunity to be innovative or contribute. That being an innovation or system thinker is not see as beyond others. Yes. Yes, some form of, I think, capacity building for different players to come into the system and take part, right? I also saw eliminate noise and distractions from the system and how that would be.
That's a good one, isn't it? I never thought of that one. It's not just introducing resources, but it's a kind of a filtering thing, isn't it? Kind of putting in some kind of filtering mechanism so that you can get the best kind of capacity there in the system. Okay, great. We're a little short on time, so we'll stay going. We've got two more areas to think about here. The next one is you, Hannah. You're on mute, Hannah. Hannah, you're on mute.
It was always going to be me. So we're at the top of the second loop here. So we're talking about how we can illuminate the new system so that those in the old system can look back and see that actually new ways of being and doing are existing and actually viable options exist. So I think what we want to think about here is the different ways that we can illuminate the new system. Probably depending on your perspective, you might think of it in terms of marketing campaigns, design, commercial, academics point of view. Like, I think this is the opportunity to be a bit creative and think about how can we show people in the old that this new way exists, and just set the timer ready.
Yeah, so it's a lot about information, isn't it? Just this new way of doing things probably exists there, but a lot of people in the old system would be unaware of it because they're locked in that paradigm, right? They're not looking for it. So how do we actually, maybe we have to kind of shape it a little bit, put together a story, but then also have effective kind of communications. Maybe that's visual, could be a could be making a documentary. That's quite often the way, or a book or something. Documentaries are quite often the way that these days that new innovations or new ways of things get introduced to our kind of collective conscience, or we become aware of, agricultural bad practice in agriculture or something like this, and new ways of doing agriculture through documentaries on the internet that spread quite quickly. So it's one example of illuminating, introducing this new system to the existing one?
There's a lot here about storytelling and using TED Talks as well. So back to one of those new innovations that are helping people learn in different ways. Actually using that to illuminate back. Interesting.
TED Talks is almost a platform for doing this, isn't it? It's not one talk, it's not one documentary, it's a whole system for TEDx too, right? For getting a little decentralized, people can stand up and say what they want to say and new things they're doing. So it's a whole system for bringing in ideas while spreading and new ideas.
And someone's put here about enlisting artists and creatives. I think that's really sparking the imagination. Get people thinking like, oh wow, yeah, it's really new and different. Time's up. There was just one more I wanted to illuminate from there, bringing up stories of change from the ground up. I'm assuming you mean they're sort of sharing other people's lived experience, like perspectives of being within the new system. Does anyone want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's what I meant, Hannah. So when the people who are experiencing the change speak for that, I think it's more relevant. It is not. It is more relatable to everybody who's listening to this. And yeah, thankfully we have had some experience with that, and we could get those students. Actually, I'm working in the education sector, and the interventions we were working on, we were able to get the students speak up about what it really meant to them. We may talk of theories of change and all that, but hearing what exactly moved for them made a lot of difference to the audience, as well as helped validate what we were doing, as we were doing right in that term. So yes, I definitely believe in bringing these voices up instead of trying to design it ourselves.
Yeah,
it may be raw, but yeah, it's a very raw emotion which is coming out there, and which is very valid. That's what I feel.
Probably far more transformative than the sort of cold hard facts of this is the value that's in the system here.
Right. Thanks.
That's a bit of appreciation from the group on that one. I think we kind of covered those as we were going through them, Josh. Should we move on? I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, sure. We have one more section here, Vijaya.
That's the last leg of the loop we are looking at. So as you see here, the first and the second loop, so there's a gap between the two, and this seems to be the point where both the systems, the incumbent system and the emerging system, seem to be existing together, but there's a gap. The gap probably created by totally different paradigms it's sitting on. So what would connect these two systems, which are quite different, right? So we don't want the old system to collapse before the new system emerges. So that would create chaos. So we need some bridge builders, either subsystems or people who play certain roles, who can facilitate the movement of people who are on the old system to the new system. So what would these bridges look like?
Yeah, they're people who kind of exist in the two worlds, right? They're maybe working in the old system, but they're also interested in and part of maybe these new communities, and are able to kind of bridge those two worlds. Or there can be spaces that enable that also.
Yeah. Okay, collective purpose, something which is common between the old and the new system. Find leverage points. Unlock the huge unrealized potential of system thinking and systems innovation. Identify common grounds. Something that is similar to collective purpose. Cross-generational, multidisciplinary collaborations, find and engage the entrepreneurs, change makers from the old system. Yes, I think this is an interesting one. Anyone wants to talk about it?
Does everybody know what an entrepreneur is? Yeah, a person who's not an entrepreneur, creating new things outside of the existing system. They're working as entrepreneurs, change makers inside existing organizations. So it's a good one, right? They're probably connecting with new entrepreneurs outside there, new ideas outside there, and bring them inside the organization and kind of trying to change it from the inside out.
Yeah, it also offers a sense of stability. Right, so the old traditional system is still very much in place, and there is still scope for the new system with its new paradigm, which is emerging out of that. So people can easily make the transition. Okay, embrace the change and map out fears, concerns, and aspirations. Okay, Joss, any final words on this one?
So again, with art and storytelling, provide opportunities for different cohorts to shared perspective, both success and failures. So you're creating different kinds of spaces, different kinds of communication channels that are connecting across, and different, these also roles, they're roles that people play. So some people play roles, you can see it up here. Some people play roles in the new system, helping to create that. Some people are playing roles in the old system, helping to sustain that, what needs to be sustained. And then there are other people who are playing this bridging role, kind of connecting between them. Really important role. Okay, we're near to the end of our time. Well done, Vijay. Well done, Hannah, and well done, all of you. Look at that. Pretty cool, I think. Of course, it was just an exercise, so we were here to learn. Hopefully, you did some of that. Hopefully, it gave you, of course, amazing things. It gives you this kind of bigger picture view of the whole kind of process. It doesn't, it doesn't tell you everything, right? It's a very zoomed out view, but it's helping us think about that change from the old system to the new one and how we might enable it. Anybody want to share any feedback, comments at this stage? Their overall experience, learning, anything about this model?
So this was my first experience of a Miro board, and when it started, I was like really fascinated by what would come out of it. And thank you everyone for giving that big picture, that how the whole model would look like in any situation. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, so that's Ramesh. She's in southern India, so it's amazing how we can collaborate. I'm here in London. We've got the rest of you. Miguel's in Spain, and so on and so forth. So we've got our friends from South Africa. So exactly, it's amazing how we can collaborate on this Miro board and work together in this way. So great. Anybody else want to share anything?
I think one of the pieces that I quite like about the two loop piece is the very end piece, the bridging. That's step 8, because it pays regard to the old system and integrating into the new system. So I quite like that, because I think at the end of any change journey, fatigue can set in and things can sometimes be forgotten to get to the end goal. So I quite like that very clearly signposts that bridging step and what might be required. And a great session. Thank you very much to all 3 of you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so I agree. I mean, there's a few innovations. There's a few things here that are kind of obvious, right? Everybody would be thinking about these, the old system and the new system and so forth. But there are a few things that are quite distinct, and you wouldn't normally be thinking about. The hospicing thing is a really important one, right? We're often quite quick to run off into the new system and think about flashy new innovations, and the bridging, exactly as you say, to enable that transition. Because if that doesn't happen, it creates a lot of problems. If you've got an old system that doesn't like the new system, you're in big trouble. And we see a lot of that going on around here. So that's really the focus of this, for us to focus on that. And if we can really get that and make it work, you can get such a powerful synergy between the old system and the new system. So that's really the power of this model and the bigger picture view. Yep. Someone else?
And with something like the education system, you can take some of the people that might be in the hospicing phase and bring them through into the new phases as well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's a few different things going on there. I mean, I said I want to reduce it down to one, but
yeah.
Okay. There's a little bit of feedback from Joss, who had to leave here early. I also have to leave now, but thanks for an insightful and meaningful conversation. The thing people get wrong about the framework is how academic and intellectual it can become, but this felt very alive and connecting in the human experience. Really lovely to be part of it. So of course, the thing to remember here is that systems change is a lot about conversations. So what we're doing here is enabling conversations. You should always remember these canvases are not solutions. We talk about them like tools as if they're technologies. So they're not. They're frameworks for people to have conversations, for everybody in the system to come together and have that conversation. And that's such a powerful thing, because often we're off in our different worlds. And we're only going to get that change by people coming together and having these conversations. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing. As systems changes, as facilitators, we're enabling other people to see themselves in this system, see the different parts, come together, have the conversations about what it looks like and how they might change that system together. So that's what we're doing. Hopefully you got that experience. Thank you all very much for joining. We've reached the end of the 90-minute session, and I look forward to seeing you all again at a future stage.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.